Today we're going to be comparing the Huawei Mate 20, the regular Mate 20 and not the Pro version, versus Samsung Galaxy S20. And I know the Mate 20 is pretty old by now, but I guess this is like a good video to see if it's finally worth upgrading your phone. So this is the low light test of the front facing camera, and I'm not in a city right now, so I'm pretty dark, and there are streetlights above me, but they're not facing under me right now. So let's move on to the next section. Starting off with the portrait mode, the biggest difference is the colors. Usually the sky is much more blue on the Samsung than the Mate 20. One thing I do like about the S20 is that it provides a lot more background blur from the start, and also the HDR is better. On the Mate 20, the sky is full blown out white. On the S20, you can see some of the separations between the blue sky and the white clouds. So usually this is one of the biggest deal breakers for me, so Samsung does do a good job at that. But one of the weaknesses on S20 is the portrait mode doesn't really work on reflective surfaces, so usually it blurs out or it doesn't really cut out that well. On the Huawei Mate 20, it seems to work perfectly fine. I'm not sure they can fix that from a firmware update. For the low light pictures, I would hands down go with the S20. Again, the HDR is the biggest factor here. I can see more details in the shadows, and the skin tone is also better as well. For the front facing camera, you can zoom out a bit on the S20, so it's nice to have more options, and there is more background blur. During low light, the Mate 20 does have a slight green hue to it. Also, the shadows are a bit more crushed, so the overall image may look a bit more dramatic. But I am surprised how good the HDR still is on the Mate 20's front facing camera. Now moving on to the everyday situations, they both are really similar because they both have a triple camera setup. The biggest difference here is the color. Samsung does have the more saturated, contrasty look, so those pictures do have the better pop factor than the Mate 20s. For HDR, I feel like the Huawei Mate 20 does have this slight edge here. I feel like I can see a bit more in the shadows. I'm not sure if it's because the contrasty look the Samsung does have, but I'm gonna let you decide on that. The other difference is the 10x. Definitely the Samsung is much more clear on that focal range. For the UI, I do prefer using the Samsung just because the zoom button is right at the middle, so I can use both my right or left hand. But on the Huawei Mate 20, there's a lot more camera modes for you, so if you're the creative person or you use these modes, then you're better off sticking with the Huawei ecosystem. And lastly, the Samsung S20 does have the wider ultra-wide angle lens. For low light, I'm voting for the S20 here. There's a lot of things that are better than the Mate 20. Across all the camera lenses, the Mate 20 just seems to be darker. And also, if you look at the darker spots, you can see a lot more noise and artifacts. Whereas on the S20, it looks pretty clean. Now, one bad thing about the S20 in low light, it does take a while to take a picture. What I mean is when I hit the shutter button, it does take a second or so to buffer, and then I can take the next picture. On the Huawei, it's very snappy. Once I hit the shutter button, it just takes the picture and I can take another one right away. So for the performance in low light, the Huawei Mate 20 does win here. For night mode, I feel like the Huawei Mate 20 is a bit more aggressive on the white balance, but you do see a difference in both regular and night mode pictures. Out in the city at night, it's not going to be a huge difference using night mode, but you will see a big difference when it's super dark. And my vote still goes to the S20 because if you look at the really dark spots, the Huawei Mate 20 is really blotchy. You can see tons of artifacts coming out and the whole image is not as clear. Now, a couple of bad things on Samsung's night mode is that for one, it's not ready right when you go to that mode. You would have to wait a bit. And two, sometimes it thinks that I'm on a tripod, I'm not sure, but it says 28 seconds. I know that I don't want to hold it for 28 seconds, but I did anyways. And the second time I'll hold it for 5 seconds and they look really identical. Now moving on to video, hands down the Samsung S20 is the winner here. From the ultra wide to the wide, and even zooming into 3x on the Samsung and 2x on the Mate, the stabilization is way better and HDR also is better as well. Samsung still has that contrasty look, so you may like that better. The S20 does offer 8K mode, and the stabilization in this 8K mode is still better than the stabilization on the Mate 20. Now when you're panning around quickly, the 8K is not really smooth, but at least the Samsung does offer a lot more camera modes than the Huawei Mate 20. I think the weakest mode on the S20 is the 4K 60. For some reason, the stabilization is not working too great at all. I can see the micro jitters on each step I take when I'm walking. Now moving on to low light, I would avoid shooting in the ultra wide angle lens at all costs. It's not super clear and it's pretty noisy. On the main camera, it's not too bad. I do notice more micro jitters on the Mate 20. So if you want the cleanest footage, then go with the Samsung. Shooting 8K in low light is pretty bad, and this is something you would want to avoid doing. Only use 8K when you're in daylight. You can see a lot more stuttering, and there's also a lot more micro jitters as well. So that is my comparison between these two phones. I feel like the Mate 20 still can't keep up with certain things. The portrait mode still works great, the cutout and the way how it recognizes things are also still good. The HDR is not the best in portrait mode, but the performance is still better than the Samsung's during nighttime. One other downside on the Mate 20 is that the colors are not consistent when you're switching lenses. So let me know what you guys think. If you are interested in any of these phones, I do have the links down below. Please follow me on Instagram, give a like, subscribe if you want to see more S20 content, hit the bell, and thanks for watching.